So on behalf of the Taproot team, welcome to our panel. We have some really incredible speakers, and so I'm looking forward to a great conversation. I'm excited to have you here for this lunch and learn. Feel free, I know someone already mentioned they're eating lunch. Definitely go ahead and do so. Like I said, casual space, show up however you feel most comfortable. My name is Kimberly Swartz. You can call me Kim. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based out of the Charlotte, North Carolina area. I'm Taproot's Senior Director of Community Engagement, which really just means that I get to do a lot of the program design and figuring out ways that we can bring community members together for impact, but also for collective joy. And so I have a pretty great job, and I'm glad that it's led me to connect with all of you through Taproot's programs. I would love at this point to pass the virtual mic over to the real leaders of today's event. So I'll go one by one, and I would love to hear an introduction from each of our volunteer panelists. So if our panelists could each share their name, or whatever you would like folks on the line to refer to you as, if you have a nickname, where you're based out of, and your professional title. So the types of professional experiences that you have shared pro bono. That would be helpful. And as our panelists are introducing themselves verbally, I would love for some of our attendees, hopefully all of our attendees, to jump into the chat box and use that space to start getting some intros flowing there. And definitely feel free to share any LinkedIn profiles if you're looking to network with other Taproot volunteers while you're on the line. So as a quick reminder, name or nickname, where you're based, professional title, and the professional skills that you've donated to nonprofits. Devin, do you mind if I start with you?
Sure thing. It's great to meet everybody on the line today. My name is Devin Harvey. I'm an investment banking vice president who work at Barclays, the investment bank. I'm based out of the Charlotte, North Carolina area as well. And I've been participating in pro bono for about the past 5 years, donating sort of my financial skill set, but also sort of a strong data and infrastructure, IT infrastructure skill set to the nonprofits that I've worked with. So excited to meet you all again, and happy to share some of the experiences that I had along the way.
Yeah, I will shout out that Devin, even though he comes from a finance background, has had some really interesting, unique partnerships with nonprofits because they don't necessarily need the exact finance skills that he does day to day at Barclays. And so he's been able to kind of flex those in really interesting, like data analysis, data infrastructure ways. So be interested to dig into that a little bit later. Anna Lynette, do you mind if I go to you next?
Sure. Thanks for having me today, and I'm really pleased to be part of this group with some great panelists and for all the people who are participating. So thanks so much for that. My name is Anna Lynette Kelly, and I'm based in Northwest New Jersey. Though I've lived around the world, I started here and I found myself back here, so it's kind of fun. I have worked for, I own a consulting business for almost 20 years. And I worked with all different types of sectors, including nonprofits. So that's when I started with that. With Taproot, I only began my time here in December, but jumped right in feet first, and have worked with several wonderful groups up until this time. I work primarily in finance and operations, but I have done project management and onboarding and management across all sorts of different industries, and I've been able to apply that to almost every volunteering position I've had so far. So it's wonderful. I look forward to continuing the trend.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And one of the reasons Anna Lynette was at the top of my list when it came to this event and doing outreach for it was you can see her sign up date and you can see when her first couple applications were to work with nonprofits, and they really are back to back. So when she says that she just dove right in, she really did. And so I think you're our newest Taproot volunteer out of our three panelists. So, and I know you're speaking to some folks on the line who are brand new to Taproot in general. So it would be interesting to get your perspective on just starting out too.
Sure.
All right. To round out our panel, Dan, I would love to pass the mic over to you for an introduction.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. My name's Dan Natina. Right now, I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains outside of Charlottesville. Just moved here recently. I started my career in Buffalo, New York, got CPA, went back to graduate school at Purdue, and have held pretty broad management positions, both in finance, operations, sales, and finally general management, running the Mid-Atlantic region for a large industrial gas company. My experience with Taproot's been about 4 or 5 years, and I would say it's a couple of different perspectives. One is really a very technical type of engagement where you're really diving into the details of a specific topic, and another one's very broad, more of a business project, business planning type experience. Both very rewarding for different reasons.
Yeah, you never know exactly what you're going to get from a Taproot engagement. Even the thing that may be described on the website by the nonprofit, once you have your initial first conversations with them, you figure out, oh, actually, you need this thing instead. So I'm going to stretch this description just a bit, and it can definitely pull in some skill sets that you didn't even necessarily know you'd be using at the outset, which is always a little fun. And Dan, I did not know you were from Buffalo. I am a massive Bills fan, so we'll have to talk about that more offline.
Sure. Go Bills.
Go Bills. All right. Well, thank you so much for getting those intros going, and for the folks that have chimed in the chat. Yes, thanks, Dee Dee. Keep that going there. And definitely share those LinkedIns if you are looking to connect with your fellow volunteers that are on the line. You're a part of a really great community. This is all people who are interested in making their world, making their communities a better place, and trying to figure out the way they can have the most impact in doing so. So definitely feel free to make those connections. But back to our presenters, you all started mentioning broadly the types of skills that you've worked with nonprofits to donate. And some of you even started alluding to a couple of projects that you've worked on. So I'd love to just jump right in and hear maybe about one particularly impactful project or partnership that you entered into using your finance, accounting, business strategy skills and donating that to a nonprofit. Tell us about that pro bono experience. And Dan, I went to you last out of our group initially, so I'm going to go to you first for this question.
Okay. One engagement was a very energetic, entrepreneurial, not-for-profit experience where the person really had a vision of what they wanted and what they were striving for and and what they expected to get out of their organization. And it was a budget assignment. And I quickly found out that it really was broader than a budget assignment, that they really needed help in coming up with whether you call it a 2, 3, 4 year business plan. They had to figure out where the sweet spot was of getting enough density or enough, strong enough, large enough business that they could sustain it over time, given what they wanted, what their goals were. And so it went pretty quickly from a 1-year budget plan to a multi-year. This is what it's going to take. And there were 2 segments of the entity that they were trying to develop, and they were both very distinct in where the funding sources were coming from, what kind of structure they needed, what kind of support levels they needed. So it was very interesting, and it was very interesting to see the individual who I was working with was very engaged with trying to figure out, okay, I see where we should be going with this. And we quickly changed gears from a 1-year budget to, a several-year business plan.
I think it's great that you and the nonprofit point person that you were working with were able to both show adaptability in the changing the initial scope of what you thought you were going to be working on together. Because I think one thing I'm sure we'll talk about more as this conversation goes on is some flexibility and some open-mindedness on both sides of the pro bono partnership is definitely one of the key things in making sure these are successful. So thanks for getting us started on a good note there. Anna Lynette, would love to go to you next.
Sure, absolutely. I had to smile before when you said that projects morph. My first project was with the Harvest Fund, which is a nonprofit that's based out of the States, but is focused in Zambia. And part of the disconnect within that organization was, one was oversight, and then it was mentoring. And so the project was initially a handbook on financial processes for the organization, which is something that's kind of old hand for me. But when I was reading it, it was strange. It was more like this in-between state of what was actual and what was desired. And it didn't actually reflect the processes that were underway. And it was also a reflection of the person who had written it, in that it wasn't up to a standard that she was going to be held to for people who would be reviewing that document. So it wound up becoming more of a professional mentoring with this individual. And it was very rewarding. It was a real high touch, high volume engagement in a short period of time. And in 3.5, almost, I think it was maybe 4 weeks time, not only did we redo the manual to be reflective of actual processes within the organization, but I know for the main participant I was working with, that she felt like her potential that stemmed from that engagement like increased 2-3-fold, something to that effect, right? So that was very, very rewarding. And I'm glad that I picked that up. It didn't seem like it was getting a lot of traction. And it's not, strictly finance, but it was finance enough to be able to sit in that space. But I've noticed that also, to kind of caveat into something else slightly different, is that I've seen, groups post for help or positions, and they said, oh, this is a small project. Well, sometimes when I read those, given the business experience that I have, I'm like, oh, I see where there's an issue there and why there's a disconnect, and it's a bit larger than what they're asking for, but you may not know that and not be able to see it, but ask anyway, because you never know what you're going to pick up, and like what happened with the Harvest Fund. So that's my little example.
And you guys are both starting us off with good just lessons learned too, and tips. And yeah, I would just underline what you mentioned, Anna Lynette, which is nonprofits, especially nonprofits that you might encounter through Taproot's programs. We aim to be incredibly inclusive when it comes to the types of organizations that are able to access resources through our services, because there's not many grant makers, there's not many resourcing organizations out there that'll work with folks, regardless of budget size, staff size, years of operations, issue area. And we do not put those eligibility parameters in place. So even if a completely volunteer-run organization comes to us, they can get access to the same resources that an organization who has 100 staff and has been around for 100 years can. So many of the organizations that you might come across through a Taproot program could not have any paid staff members, and certainly not have a staff member in the exact area of expertise that you would be providing. And so sometimes there is that question of, okay, they asked for something, but they don't have the background to even know what they're asking for.
Yeah.
So that's a good nugget. We'll keep that in mind and maybe talk about that a little bit more as we go.
Sure.
Because Devin, I want to pass the mic over to you for that same question that we posed to our first two panelists, sharing about maybe a particularly impactful pro bono consulting experience that you've had.
Yeah, absolutely. This was one of my first experiences in pro bono. I was working with an organization based out of Delaware, help making therapeutic and psychiatric care more accessible in the Delaware area. And this was actually through my employer. So I was working with a team of other bankers from Barclays, which was nice. So we had a very strong financial skill set on the team for this project. And the organization really came to us with the request of how do we become profitable? It was pretty open-ended, very simple, but there's a lot of different angles to it. And so it really took a lot of time for us to really understand the organizational structure, the mission, the programs. Since they were dealing in medical services, this is not an area where we had a ton of personal experience. So we've really had to engage with their full team and really understand how insurance billbacks work, which is something we don't really see or really know how it works outside of trying to figure out our own medical bills from time to time. So it took a lot of time upfront just working with the organization to really understand how all of their operations worked, and then trying to figure out all of the different kind of financial information they had. So we weren't really just diving into financial statements. We were looking at all of their billings data, appointment by appointment, trying to figure out how the insurance billbacks worked, which insurers they're working with, the timesheets for all of the therapists and psychiatrists that they had on staff to try to figure out whether there was more efficient allocation of resources or staffing. And so we were able to come up with a really nice answer and come up with some good recommendations for focusing on certain insurance providers or focusing or kind of rejiggering the way that they staff and they hire for new therapists. But I think that it took a lot of kind of hitting the brakes. I feel like in my industry, we like to jump right into problem solving right away. And it took a lot of time to really understand the organization, understand the programs, understand what data they had to figure out exactly how to put together a good solution for them. And I think that kind of the work on the data side of that, as Kimberly alluded to at the top of the call, has kind of launched me into a lot of other data focused pro bono engagements to be able to kind of work with organizations wrangling these large data sets they have and being able to make important strategic decisions based off of the data that they may or may not have yet.
I feel like you just gave us a lesson in like pro bono consulting best practices right there when you just mentioned going through this long list of questions and making sure that you're taking the time for that proper onboarding so that you know the full context before jumping into problem solving. So that's something folks on the line, folks who are listening into this recording later, jot that down. You definitely want to make the space in your project to listen first before going in to problem solving and solutions mode. Because I know it's tempting for all of us to just go in and say, no, I know how to fix this. Let me just go. But these nonprofits, it's a different industry. They're working with a different team size, different resources available, available currently, available for implementation down the road. So you really need to make sure the solution fits their requirements. So you each talked a little bit about what the nonprofit received from each of these engagements. Obviously, they received a ton of value from having you as their pro bono partner. And it sounds like from some of these experiences, they also built their own professional skills as well. I mean, Anna Lynette, you talked about you did some professional coaching there just to build their skill set, which is fantastic. But I'm curious, from your skills-based volunteer experiences, do you feel like you've gained anything? Do you feel like you've built certain skills or maybe gained certain benefits by donating your professional skills? I'll go to whoever wants to jump on the question first. Anna Lynette, you're unmuted, so I think your default.
Oh, I'm on default. Okay, no worries. Well, I think what it comes down to, you had mentioned that to not jump into solving problems. I did have a strange engagement, which was it was potentially a huge project, and it was migrating to QuickBooks Online from a Sage system that no longer is even operating, and there was so much resistance on the part of the person who was running the finance department. And our initial call was like back in February, and I could hear all these things that were issues, like just from a management standpoint and whatever. And so the project was kind of put on semi-hold, and I just kind of sat back and had to go into a place of trust and not go into do mode. And it turns out the woman finally actually she needed the phone call and that sense of accountability in order to jump in fully to migrate their large system into a more workable process for themselves. So for me, as somebody that is a fixer I've been fixing for a very long time, to be able to just sit back and just say, okay, just take a breath and let things unfold, was a good reminder about, when you're coming together to meet another person in a way that is, not driven by typical business needs, and it's more about sharing to accomplish a goal. So I'd say that would be my contribution to the inquiry.
No, I really appreciate that. And I think it speaks to you're working with a brand new team, and you have to get to know personalities and communication styles and like what tactics are going to work and not work. And that can help you grow and flex as a professional quite a bit just from being thrown into these new settings. So I really love that. Dan, Devin, does anything come to mind for you both?
Well, I would say I piggyback on that, your comment. The experience I've had is twofold. One is where I love business planning. I love setting a business plan and trying to come at it from a lot of different angles. And I've had a multifaceted career, and I just enjoy that. I enjoy the diversity of it. And so I've had experience with that. But to Anna's point, I had almost the exact same topic of going into a computer accounting system conversion. And in that case, I was more of a colleague to my contact at the organization. And instead of, trying to lead or take charge or to be the fixer or whatever, it was more of a layback sit. You're contributing and you're trying, somebody I grew to respect an awful lot. You're trying to, be more of a teammate. And so, you have to wear a couple different hats and depending on what the situation is. And to a point you made earlier, it's cloudy in the beginning of what is the scope. And you have to walk through that, listen very carefully, even before you get an engagement. And I remember one I turned down because it was too cloudy and it didn't appear like it was going to be really a good fit for me. So I think for me, that's what I got out of it is, there's two different modes I find that I'm operating in. One is, one where I can use the whole broad background that I do have and help somebody, push an organization forward, but also to be a good teammate and try to, help and learn a lot about something that, I may not have a great background in, but still be able to learn and contribute in a team environment.
Oh, man, I saw some head nods as you were sharing that, Dan. I saw Mark nodding his head. So it sounds like that definitely is resonating with some other folks on the line too. I'm picking up on that last comment that you made. Yeah, you're going to be learning so much from the nonprofit as well. Maybe different things, right? Maybe not having to do with your finance, accounting, business planning, business strategy skills, but learning about the social issue and the dynamics of nonprofit governance and what it takes to run and lead organizations that their bottom line isn't revenue generation. Their bottom line is community impact. So there's so much learning to absorb there. Thank you for raising your hand. I see a few folks who are going to chime in. I want to go to Devin, our last panelist, with that same question, and then I'll jump to some of the folks who have their hands up. All right. Devin, please go ahead.
Sure, and I can go quick since we've got some questions. But I definitely echo everything that Dan and Anna Lynette had said about the sort of the interpersonal and teamwork and learning to balance different hats and all of these different kinds of engagements. But in terms of also like just sort of pure skills that I developed on the job. It's funny that I also have a sort of a accounting system conversion experience as part of my pro bono engagements, which is something that I really wouldn't have thought that I would have done 5 years ago when I started out being in pro bono. I'm really just a financial professional. I don't have a ton of accounting experience. I've certainly had never opened up a QuickBooks or Sage or anything, but my most recent engagement was helping an organization convert from their legacy Sage system into something a little bit more modern that can help operate them more efficiently. But I mentioned in the first question, my first project that I was working with the Delaware organization, I was helping them become profitable, but working with a lot of their data. And that kind of gave me some experience working with different sets of nonprofit data, helping them manage that, extract some insights, produce some KPIs, and help being able to make decision making off of that. My subsequent projects started to become a little bit more data focused as I had started becoming more comfortable advising nonprofits in matters of data analysis, data management, data creation, data storage, things like that. And that kind of progressed into, well, what sort of systems are you using to manage and interact with your data? So I helped organizations work with their different CRM platforms, to think about what's the best option here. How can you make sure this is a strong part of your data pipeline that's making you more efficient as an organization? And then that led to the most recent project, which was helping them with an accounting system. So it kind of really built a skill set that I never thought I would have had. I guess you could have convinced me that I would have some data analysis experience, but I never would have thought that I would have the sort of IT infrastructure, IT procurement, or an advisory on my resume as something that I'd be able to help nonprofits with. But it's something now that I've led a couple of organizations through the process and kind of experienced firsthand. It's something that I feel like I can help more organizations with in the future. So that's definitely a very important skill to develop.
I really appreciate that story because I do hear from folks who have just signed up for Taproot or maybe just considering skills-based volunteering for the first time. And oftentimes the main thing is, well, I don't know if I match anything that you have available. I don't know if my skills are the right fit for anything. And odds are they are. But what's holding people back is a little bit of self-doubt that they're going to be able to stretch to fill the challenge that the nonprofit has stated, and be able to kind of stretch mold themselves to this new environment and new challenge. So I think it's great that you came in with a pretty pure finance background, but now have morphed into providing it's like operations support to the organizations that you've been doing pro bono consulting for. So thanks for those. I want to jump to MJO, and then I saw Mark's hand as well. So we'll start with MJO's question.
Okay, hi. You were talking about asking about what you've gotten out of volunteering. I've gotten a lot of new skills out of volunteering. I'm an accountant with more than 25 years of very small business and very small nonprofit experience, professional experience, usually organizations under 40 employees. And one of the organizations I volunteer with right now needed somebody to do their 990. I am not a tax accountant, but I figured it out and I did it, and it was extraordinarily satisfying. And now that's in my skill set, and I can use that with other nonprofits.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely love that. You're literally beefing up your resume, but it's for the purpose of more social good created from it. Thank you so much for sharing that, MJO. Mark, do you mind if I hop to you next?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Kim. I just wanted to say that, I mean, I also find volunteering with not-for-profits to be very rewarding and fulfilling. But I was impressed with something that Dan said about, sometimes you can go in there and you can ask a lot of questions and you can try to really define exactly what the project is about. But if you get enough pushback where the organization really doesn't want to change, doesn't really want what you're there for, that you just say, maybe we're just not destined to work together. And to just accept that and not try to push so hard to get them to accept it.
I think that's such an important point, Mark. Thank you for highlighting that. Because Dan, I also noted that when you shared your interview experience, you had said, you know, the conversation, it just didn't, oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. I got too excited. But when you shared that in your interview experience, it just didn't feel right. It felt too nebulous, and that the nonprofit wouldn't be able to appropriately use your time and skills. I just want to say, this is official Taproot perspective here. You do not need to stay with a nonprofit that you've applied for, right? Like, this is a pro bono experience, this is a volunteer commitment, and it's actually helpful for the nonprofit if you are able to give them constructive feedback on, hey, I know you thought you needed this, but from our conversation, it actually feels like you need XYZ, and I don't feel like I'm the right fit to give you XYZ. You have still helped that organization align with what their next steps should be. And now they can go and look for resources in a slightly different area. And Taproot can help them with that. So please never feel hesitant to say, no, this isn't right for me, and here's why. So Mark, thank you so much for highlighting that. And I know we have some folks on the line who might also be experienced themselves. I know Jan has told me personally he's had to say some constructive no's to nonprofits. And so if other folks have that experience, definitely feel free to shout it out in the chat. Oh, Jan, did you want to go ahead and hop in?
No, I just heard my name and
You're like, all right, time to come on camera.
I'm not sure I've had too many constructive no's. I've had a few no's that were a little more authentic than what you outlined. But yeah, you got to tell them no sometimes. Usually my problem is they screw up or they do something weird.
It's a partnership, right? And so some of the times, if the nonprofit isn't being communicative, if they're not getting you the onboarding materials that you need, if they're not showing up to meetings, those are also appropriate times for you to say no. And that might be what Jan means when it's not so constructive.
Yeah, I had one of the things that is one of my very strong, I have every one of my nonprofits fill out a questionnaire because I do accounting implementation work, usually, or accounting systems work, usually QuickBooks, something, you know, related to that. Used to be SAP when I was working for a living and getting paid for it. Now I'm not. And I always, in the questionnaire, it says, please understand that if you cancel a meeting with less than 12 hours notice, I won't work with you anymore because I can't tell whether your excuse is valid or not, right? And I went through a period there when I first started where I had 2 or 3 people cancel meetings, and you know, I lose an afternoon because I'm a retired guy. I want to do other stuff, hopefully drinking beer. But so I have that rule, and it happened just yesterday. Somebody just blew me off, and I canceled the meeting. I closed out the project and canceled all of their further appointments. You have to do that occasionally. You have your own time and your own value. And some people just don't get it. As soon as they say volunteer, they think, we can do anything we want. They don't cost us anything. It's great. Okay, I'm done.
Well, I'm glad we let you have the soapbox to get on. Anna Lynette, please go ahead.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I think that there's sometimes a really significant difference between what somebody intends and what they can recognize they need, and maybe need it so much that they can't actually fulfill their side of the bargain. I think that's probably more so happens than it is that they are blowing off. You know, when I'm doing change management, I work a triage approach to everything. You know, what's the thing that needs to get, you know, what's bleeding out, you know? And sometimes when you have an idealistic approach to something in a project you want to do, sometimes it just doesn't actually meet what happens on the ground. So from my perspective, I've learned flexibility over my decades of doing this type of thing. But there is a time where there needs to be accountability too. And so, you know, each one will run their own, but I just wanted to offer a slightly different perspective there.
No, I think that's helpful. And I would shout out a tip from the Taproot perspective is that when you're entering into a pro bono partnership or engagement, you should really work with your partner to define some sort of success criteria. Like, how do we both know that this partnership has been successful, that it's completed? So success criteria, completion criteria, I've seen it called both things. But that can help create some of that accountability as well. I know it's helped when I've done pro bono consulting engagements myself as the volunteer, and also have received pro bono as the nonprofit. Yeah, Jan, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, you'll probably be sorry you got me started. I do want to say thank you though, because this, I've had a couple of engagements where the people were obviously in over their head and there just wasn't anything that I could do about it. And this is an interesting approach of saying, hey, I can't help you. You need somebody other than me, and to move on. I think it's a valid approach, and I appreciate you mentioning that because it never occurred to me to take that approach. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's consulting in and of itself too, right? In that you've helped them dig into their challenge and you've helped diagnose that maybe you're not the right solution for the challenge. And now the deliverable you are giving the organization is, okay, I think you need to go down this other path. With that, I want to go to a question that came in from one of our registrants who couldn't attend live. And it's also conveniently related to one of the questions I had shared with our panelists in advance, as I think we might want to talk about this. Pro bono project management. So we have some folks who are nervous just around the time commitment and what it looks like actually managing a partnership with a nonprofit. And so I'd love for Devin, Dan, Anna Lynette, for you all to share what are some ways that you've helped move your finance, accounting, data, et cetera, projects along successfully with your nonprofit partner. And again, I'll go to whoever wants to jump in for this question first.
I can kick things off this time. I think it was something that was mentioned at the beginning, but kind of combining a flexible attitude towards the initial request with also sort of a lot of discipline around the scope of the project. I feel like for me, the discovery phase of the project, just sort of learning as much about the organization, their programs, how they operate, who the staff members are, what the resources are, that is very helpful for any project. But it also kind of gives you in the organization you're working with a lot of different ideas for things that could be kind of improved upon, even if they're not really the core objective of the project. So kind of bucketing the ideas that come up from both sides as a part of like these are things that are core to the project and core to the objective that we're going to work on together, and then these are things that are kind of on the side, also important but not really what we're here to work on. Maybe they're nice to haves if there's additional time at the project or if we get around to it, but these are firmly not in the scope versus these are the things that are firmly in the scope. I find that just really helps set up the project for success, keep things moving along smoothly. Having kind of sharing that scope, being open and communicative about that scope from both sides very much helps make sure everybody's on the same page, everybody's moving towards the common goal at the same pace. And I feel like through all the different programs, having that frank discussion up front on what is to be done and what is really not going to be a focus in the project has really just kind of helped things stay efficient and stay sort of and keep both sides kind of happy with the progress that's been done.
Yeah, I really like that idea that you mentioned of almost having a parking lot for ideas or items that come up that you are able to mutually decide, okay, well, that's out of the scope for the need to haves, but depending on time availability at the end, we may be able to revisit.
Because you don't want to lose those ideas. They're good ideas for the organization to keep around. They're good ideas to keep in context as you're going through the rest of the project, but they're just not going to be the core issues to focus on during the project.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Dan, Anna Lynette, do either of you want to chime in and add to that?
Well, I think the initial interviews are very important to listen and to come up with a framework of how do you define success? What is it that you're really looking for? Because it will morph. And then, you have to stay disciplined and trying to move the project along. And If you see that it's not, that there's not that commitment, and you have to get that in the interview process, I'm going to commit, so I need to know the organization's going to commit. Will you have the time? Will you have the resources? Is there some energy around, getting to the success point of however you define it? I think if you have to develop that up front, and then you stay to the task. I mean, things can change, so yes, you have to be somewhat flexible, but they just can't morph into something else, and I think you really have to stay committed to that, and hopefully your partner on the other side is committed to it too.
Yeah, we that morphing that you're talking about, we Taproot has some jargon. We call it scope creep, and it's our worst enemy here at Taproot. Anna Lynette, did you want to add to that? Just a list of project management tips?
Well, yeah, project creep is definitely high up there on the list. I'm a project manager and Lean Six Sigma certified. So for me, I've always been really good about moving stuff back onto the track. Oh, that's really an interesting story. So what do you think about and bringing him back again? But it's interesting. Like when you're meeting with somebody, I kind of equate it to like dating, right? Sometimes you're like, oh, I never want to go on another date with this person again. And then you're like, yeah, I can see this going for a few weeks, that type of thing. So sometimes, sometimes there's really good synergy, and sometimes there's like this sort of soft ground where you kind of have to go a little slower maybe, or be a little bit more diligent or methodical about how you approach stuff. And my example before about the finance manager who was like, on stone tablets and was still, trying to hold on to that system, but the conversation is what prompted her to move forward. Flexibility is key, just being kind of being firm and flexible at the same time. And it's a bit of a skill set to develop, but I think on the volunteer side and on the organization side, that coming in with that mindset will most likely lead to a good result. More than one date.
I like the dating analogy. Actually, when Taproot first launched Taproot Plus, which is I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, this online marketplace where you can find a lot of these virtual volunteer opportunities. No, nothing like that really existed out there. So they called it at the time the Match.com for skills-based volunteering. So dating analogies work very well for us.
I love it.
Emjo, did you want to jump in with either a comment from your own experiences or a question?
Yeah, I had a question, and I apologize if I'm rushing your plans here. I need to leave soon. I'm looking for advice. So when I look at like Taproot Plus or other, United Way, whatever, I see a lot of opportunities that my skill set would be appropriate for, but it's really hard to determine just from that information that's there, if it's something that I want to apply for. Sometimes the requests seem really like stale, like they're 3 months old or 5 months old. But in the nonprofit world, things move slowly. Maybe it's still active. How do I know? And sometimes because the requests are not being requested by someone who's in the space that I'm in, the language is difficult to understand. Maybe it's not very professionally phrased, or maybe it's not phrased in a way that is business speak. And so any advice you have about, screening those, having, how to make the decisions. Also, sometimes when I've reached out to them, it's crickets, and then that's kind of disappointing too.
Yeah, and that can take away some of the enthusiasm. I wonder, a few of our panelists have mentioned how important the interview process is, and I'm wondering if any of the three of you could speak to that, because I think it gets to part of Emjo's question around how can you figure out exactly what they're asking for and if the skills are actually a good fit. And Anna Lynette, you actually just spoke to this as kind of
Yeah.
part of the dating screening process in a way.
It is. It's very much so. But I've worked for all different sides of size businesses, from corporate to mom and pops, and a lot of times an organization develops language processes and systems because it kind of was the default, and it's scrappiness or passion that's making that operation move. And they could still have success with that. It doesn't mean it's not like Flintstone wheels, they're square, but still moving, but there's to give credence to an organization that is trying to do something, I think goes a long way. Even if the language is lacking or the overall understanding of how to fix something is lacking, sometimes just the probing types of questions and soft introductions of have you ever considered or would you be willing to consider, I find that that's probably my best friend in any engagement that I've worked with, either whether it's professional or on in my spiritual work. It's the same thing. Are you willing to, or can you consider? Because it's not about then the thing, it's about opening up them to considering it, right? It's opening up the mindset to being able to receive something different than what they initially thought. And that goes a really far way in creating rapport with somebody. So I'd say don't give up, and don't give up.
I like that call to action, and I really like those examples of probing questions. It's kind of testing open-mindedness on the other side, which I like. Dan, Devin, did you want to jump in with any tips, advice for MJO? I would say from the Taproot side, one thing to keep in mind is that if a nonprofit receives a volunteer application and doesn't take action on it, we actually deactivate their listing until they provide some sort of response to the volunteer. And if they never do that, then the listing is not going to be published again, because we don't want things to be active if nonprofits aren't taking action on really talented applicants that are coming through. So we do have that safeguard in place. But reach out to our team, talk to us. If you're having trouble finding what you think is the right fit, we can help do a little bit of more refined searching on your behalf. We actually love to do that. We love when we get requests from volunteers saying like, hey,
if anything, it's
help
the
us with the
opposite. There's like too many.
Too many.
There's probably 20 organizations that were asking for help with 990s, for example.
Yeah. And this is definitely there's ebbs and flows to the types of requests you're going to see on the marketplace too. I've noticed just from reviewing requests recently, it's a hot period for 990 and like tax filing support, versus when we get later in the year, Dan, like business planning, anything involving strategy is going to become a lot more popular because folks are wrapping up their year, trying to plan for 2025. So there is a bit of seasonality to this as well, but use our staff members as support people for helping that matchmaking, because we know our nonprofits, we know what's on the marketplace, and we can help try and make those connections.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just keeping an eye on the clock, and we have a few minutes left, and like I mentioned, I'm very determined to make sure this stays within the 60-minute boundary. So I think I'll end with one quick question. I originally shared it with our panelists as a potential icebreaker, and then I was told this is too hard of an icebreaker. So instead, I saved it to the end. If you had to describe skills-based volunteering in one word or phrase, what would that one word or phrase be? Devin, do you mind if I start with you?
I was actually going to hop off just so nobody could steal my word, since I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I was going to say symbiotic. I think it's a relationship that you're forming with an organization where there's a lot of potential for both sides to benefit. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about And we all have a great sense of our own skill sets and the skills that we can provide organizations that are doing great work, that are in great need of the services and skills that we can provide. But I think we also spend a lot of time talking about the benefits that we gain from it, from the sort of the interpersonal dynamics, the softer skills, the hard sort of technical skills that you can refine, that you can gain and add. There's just a lot of potential for upside from both parties. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. I think that it's like all relationships, not everyone is going to be kind of amazing. Some are going to take a little bit more work, but they all have a ton of potential to provide great benefits for both sides.
I love it. Anna Lynette, do you want to jump in next?
I read that question a few times when it was originally sent to us, and I have to be honest. I think my word is hopeful, and in the sense that coming in with the availability and the desire to help an organization further their mission. And I really think that encompasses the whole thing. And I think on the receiving side is probably the same, right? Hope to solve problems and issues that they're facing, so they have, they're more efficient at serving the needs of their organization as well. And so that's the word I'm going to go with.
I love that. It's all about the potential, right? How you two can come together and create more potential for the community.
Yep.
Dan, we'll round things out with you.
That's a tough act to follow, those two. That's very good. I actually posed it. I was playing golf with a bunch of people last week, and I posed this question to them because I was having such a hard time with the question. I won't share their responses. But I like symbiotic. I think that's very good. And as I thought about it, it's there's a mutuality to this that you both are going to hopefully gain from this, and so there's a benefit to it from the actual work. And then I think there's a gratification part of it too, particularly for myself. That at the end of the day, you feel like you've helped somehow, some way, and hopefully the organization feels that way too. So
I love that idea of ending us off with that point around joy. You're creating joy for yourself, for the organization, and for the community that they serve. More good. So with that, oh yeah, did you want to jump in, Joe?
Fun. When people ask me, I always say this it's super fun.
Oh, beautiful. Well, I think that is how I want to go ahead and close things out. Thank you so much, of course, to our three amazing panelists. I'm so glad that we had you here to share your insight, share your experience, and just share some candid advice with the folks on the line and the people who are listening in to this recording next week, next month, next year as they sign up to become a volunteer themselves. And thank you all for joining us live, all of our attendees for jumping in with questions and introductions, and for the folks who are listening into this event. We really appreciate you all being a part of this community, all with this goal of we can use what we're uniquely great at to make a difference. And it's such a special group to be a part of. So thanks for making my day by joining us during today's event.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thanks so much.
All right, I'm going to let you go. Bye, everyone, and we'll be in touch later today with the recording.
Bye-bye.
Bye.